The first time the horse tried to throw her off the mountain trail, Emily Carter realized she had made a terrible mistake. The animal's muscles tensed beneath her saddle like a coiled spring, its dark mane whipping wildly in the cold wind as it reared without warning. For one terrifying second, Emily thought she was going to fall straight down the rocky slope that disappeared into a canyon hundreds of feet below. She clutched the saddle horn, heart hammering against her ribs. "Easy! Easy!" she shouted, but the horse didn't listen. The powerful stallion stomped violently, snorting clouds of breath into the frosty air. Its ears flattened, eyes wide with fear and defiance. The trail beneath them was narrow, crumbling along the edge of the canyon. One wrong step and both of them would be gone. And at that moment, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the words she'd heard just 2 days earlier at the livestock auction. "Don't buy that one," the old rancher had warned. "That horse is trouble." Just 3 days earlier, Emily had stood at the crowded auction yard outside a dusty rural town, surrounded by the sounds of restless animals and bargaining voices. The wind carried the smell of hay and leather. Horses stomped in wooden pens while buyers walked past, inspecting them like merchandise. Emily had never planned to buy a horse that day. In fact, she hadn't planned to buy one at all. But life had been complicated lately. A year earlier, she had left her job in the city after a painful divorce that shattered the future she thought she had. The quiet ranch her grandfather left her in his will was supposed to be a place to heal, a place to breathe again. But the ranch felt empty without animals. And the silence sometimes felt louder than the noise she left behind. So when she saw the horse standing alone at the far corner of the auction yard, something inside her stirred. The stallion was taller than the others, his coat a deep, stormy gray that shimmered in the sunlight. But what caught her attention wasn't his strength. It was his eyes. Wild. Watchful. Like he didn't trust a single human within miles. The sign on the pen read, "Untrained Mustang, captured in the Badlands." A group of men stood nearby shaking their heads. "That one's impossible," one muttered. "Broke 2 fences already," said another. "Whoever buys him better have good insurance." Emily should have walked away. Instead, she stepped closer. The stallion lifted his head slowly, watching her with an intensity that made her stop in her tracks. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the horse snorted sharply and turned away, pacing the pen like a restless storm. "Don't do it," the old rancher beside her said quietly. Emily turned. The man leaned on the fence rail, his weathered face lined with years under the sun. "That horse hates people," he continued. "Some horses are just born wild." Emily looked back at the stallion. "He doesn't hate people," she said softly. The rancher raised an eyebrow. "What makes you so sure?" Emily hesitated. "I think he's just scared." An hour later, she stood at the auction ring holding a small numbered paddle. The stallion was led into the ring, fighting the rope the entire way. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he reared high, hooves striking the air. "Starting bid, 300, the auctioneer shouted. No one raised a hand. The horse lunged again, dragging the handler sideways. 200. Silence. Emily felt dozens of eyes watching the animal with doubt. The auctioneer sighed. 100. Her heart pounded. This was crazy. She barely knew how to train a wild horse. But something about those eyes. Before she could talk herself out of it, she lifted the paddle. "I'll take him." The gavel slammed. Sold. And just like that, the biggest mistake of her life might have begun. Back in the present moment on the narrow canyon trail, Emily clung to the saddle as the stallion finally settled enough to stop rearing. Her breath shook. "Okay," she whispered. "Maybe they were right about you." The horse snorted again. But something strange happened next. Instead of trying to throw her off again, the stallion suddenly turned his head toward the canyon wall. His ears twitched. His entire body stiffened. Emily frowned. "What is it?" The horse didn't move. He just stared ahead down the trail. And then, he refused to take another step. No matter how gently Emily nudged him. No matter how hard she pulled the reins. The stallion planted his hooves firmly into the dirt and would not move. At first, Emily felt frustrated. But then she noticed something that made her stomach twist. The ground ahead looked different. The trail surface was cracked, loose, like it had shifted recently. Emily leaned forward, squinting. And that's when she saw it. A massive section of the trail about 20 feet ahead had collapsed entirely. The path simply ended. A sheer drop waited just beyond the broken earth. If the horse had taken 3 more steps, they would have both fallen into the canyon. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she looked down at the stallion beneath her. "You stopped us." The horse snorted softly, and for the first time since she bought him, he didn't look angry. He looked calm, as if he had just made a decision. Emily exhaled slowly, running a shaking hand along his neck. "Maybe," she whispered, "you weren't the wrong horse after all." But neither of them realized yet that the real danger on that mountain hadn't even begun. And what this horse would do before the day ended would change Emily's life forever. Emily kept her hand resting on the stallion's neck, her fingers buried in his thick grey mane as the cold wind moved through the canyon. Her heart was still pounding from the realization of what had almost happened. 20 feet ahead, the mountain trail had completely collapsed, leaving nothing but a jagged edge of broken earth and a terrifying drop into the canyon below. If the horse hadn't stopped, Emily swallowed hard. "All right," she whispered quietly to the animal beneath her. "You win." The stallion flicked his ears back toward her voice but didn't move. His breathing had slowed now, the tension that had filled his body earlier slowly fading. For the first time since she bought him, Emily felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Maybe even respect. She carefully guided him backward a few steps away from the dangerous edge. The stallion responded cautiously but willingly this time, placing each hoof with surprising care. "Good," she murmured softly. "Nice and easy." It was strange. Just hours earlier, he had fought every instruction she gave him. Now he was listening. Not perfectly, but enough. Emily turned him slowly away from the broken trail, guiding him toward a narrow path that curved deeper along the mountain ridge. The sky above the canyon had begun to change. Grey clouds were rolling in quickly from the west, thick and heavy, swallowing the blue sky that had been there earlier. Emily frowned as she glanced upward. That's not good. The weather in these mountains could change in minutes. And when storms arrived here, they didn't come gently. They came like avalanches of wind and rain. She checked her watch. It was later than she realized. If she didn't make it back to the ranch before the storm hit, the trail could become dangerous very quickly. She nudged the horse forward. "Let's go, troublemaker," she said with a small smile. The stallion snorted as if he didn't appreciate the nickname. But he started moving. As they continued down the winding mountain path, Emily studied the horse beneath her more carefully. He was powerful, far stronger than the ranch horses she had ridden before. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. Even the way he stepped over loose rocks showed a natural intelligence she hadn't noticed before. Maybe the men at the auction had been wrong. Or maybe they just didn't have the patience to see what this horse could become. A gust of wind suddenly whipped across the ridge. The stallion's head shot up. His ears pointed forward sharply. Emily felt it too. The temperature had dropped quickly. A distant rumble echoed across the mountains. Thunder. "Oh no," Emily muttered. The storm was coming faster than she expected. The first drops of rain began falling moments later. Cold. Sharp. Within seconds, the wind strengthened, pushing against them with surprising force. The horse shifted nervously beneath her. "It's okay," Emily said gently. "We'll get through it." But the mountain had other plans. Rain turned into a sudden downpour. The trail quickly became slick with mud. Loose rocks began sliding down the slopes beside them. Thunder cracked again, louder this time. The stallion suddenly stopped moving. Emily leaned forward. "Come on, we have to keep going." But the horse refused. His muscles tightened again, just like they had earlier. Only this time, it wasn't stubbornness. It was fear. A loud crack echoed somewhere above them. Emily's head snapped upward. Her eyes widened. Rock slide. High on the canyon wall, a cluster of stones broke loose, tumbling violently down the mountainside toward the trail. Emily's pulse exploded with panic. Go! Go! She kicked lightly, urging the stallion forward. But the horse didn't bolt down the trail. Instead, he spun sharply to the side. Emily gasped as the stallion leaped off the narrow path and climbed upward along a steep patch of rocky ground. Whoa! She grabbed the saddle horn again as the horse scrambled upward with incredible strength. Seconds later, boom! A wave of rocks crashed down across the trail behind them. Dust and debris exploded into the air. Emily twisted in the saddle, staring at the destroyed section of trail they had just escaped. If they had stayed there even 2 more seconds, they would have been buried beneath thousands of pounds of rock. Her breathing became shallow. She slowly turned forward again. The stallion stood on a higher ridge now, his chest rising and falling steadily as rain poured over both of them. Emily stared at his neck, water dripping from his manner. You saved us, again. The horse shook his head, spraying droplets everywhere. For the first time since buying him, Emily laughed. A real laugh. It felt strange after so many difficult months. But something about this moment, standing in the rain on a mountain ridge with a wild horse who had just protected her twice, felt almost unreal. She reached forward and gently rubbed his neck. You might be the smartest horse I've ever met. The stallion snorted again. But this time, he didn't pull away. The storm continued to grow stronger. Lightning flashed across the sky. Emily knew they couldn't stay exposed on the ridge much longer. We need shelter, she said quietly. She looked down the slope and spotted something through the rain. An old wooden structure tucked against the mountain. A small abandoned ranger cabin. Perfect, she whispered. Carefully guiding the horse down the slope, she rode toward the cabin as thunder rolled through the canyon again. But as they approached the weathered building, the stallion suddenly slowed. His ears flicked again. His body became tense. Emily frowned. What is it now? The horse refused to step closer. Instead, he stared toward the cabin door. The wind creaked the old wood. Rain pounded against the roof. Everything looked empty. But the stallion kept staring. Emily felt a strange chill run down her spine. Okay, that's weird. Slowly, she dismounted, keeping one hand on the reins. Stay here, she said softly. The horse didn't move. Emily walked cautiously toward the cabin door. The wind pushed it open slightly. Creak. Inside was darkness. Broken furniture. Dust. But something else too. A sound. Very faint. A weak voice. Hello. Emily froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Someone was inside. And they sounded hurt. She rushed forward, pushing the door open wider. Hello. Another weak reply came from the back corner. Please, help. Emily's eyes adjusted to the dim light. And what she saw made her gasp. A man lay on the floor near the far wall. His leg twisted at a painful angle. Blood soaked through his pant leg. He looked exhausted, pale, barely conscious. Emily dropped to her knees beside him. Oh my God, what happened? The injured man struggled to speak. Horse, threw me, yesterday. Emily's stomach tightened. He had been trapped here all night. In the middle of the storm. Alone. She looked back toward the doorway where her stallion stood outside in the rain. And suddenly, the truth hit her. If that horse hadn't forced them off the trail. If he hadn't climbed the ridge. If he hadn't refused to walk past this cabin. Emily never would have found this man. She looked at the stallion again. You brought me here, she whispered. The horse stood silently in the rain. Watching. And somehow, Emily felt like that wild Mustang understood exactly what he had done. The storm outside had grown fierce, pounding rain against the roof of the abandoned cabin like a drum. Wind howled through the cracks in the old wooden walls, making the entire structure groan as if it might collapse at any moment. Emily knelt beside the injured man, her heart racing as she tried to assess his condition. Up close, he looked to be in his late 50s. His face was rough and sunburned from years outdoors, but now it was pale with exhaustion. His clothes were soaked, and the leg twisted beneath him looked badly broken. How long have you been here? Emily asked urgently. The man blinked slowly, struggling to focus on her. Since yesterday afternoon, he muttered weakly. Emily's chest tightened. That meant he had spent the entire night alone in the mountains, with no help, no shelter from the cold storm, and no way to walk. "How did you even get here?" she asked. The man swallowed, his voice shaky. "My horse, spooked on the trail, threw me off. I crawled here before the rain started." Emily looked around the dim cabin again. It was barely more than a rotting shelter, but it had at least kept him out of the worst of the weather. Still, he wouldn't last another night here. His leg was clearly broken, and he was losing blood. Emily took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "Okay," she said softly. "Listen to me. My name is Emily. I have a horse outside. I'm going to get you back to my ranch." The man stared at her like she had just suggested flying. In this storm? Emily hesitated. He wasn't wrong. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains again. The trail would be muddy, dangerous, and possibly blocked by the rockslide they barely escaped earlier. But staying here wasn't an option. If the temperature dropped tonight, this man could easily slip into hypothermia. Emily looked toward the cabin door. Through the rain, she could see the grey stallion standing exactly where she left him. Calm. Alert. Waiting. Her mind raced with doubt. Just 2 days ago, she didn't even trust this horse enough to ride him safely. And now, she might have to trust him with 2 lives. Emily stood slowly and walked back to the doorway. The stallion lifted his head when he saw her. Rain streamed down his dark coat, but he didn't seem bothered by the storm at all. She approached him carefully, placing a gentle hand on his neck. "All right," she whispered. "I guess we're doing this together." The horse snorted softly. For the first time, Emily noticed something different in his eyes. The wild fear that had been there at the auction. The angry resistance from earlier. It was fading. In its place was something quieter. Something steady. Almost like trust. Inside the cabin, Emily worked quickly. She found an old blanket in her still bag and tore it into strips to wrap around the man's injured leg, trying her best to stabilize it. "What's your name?" she asked while tightening the makeshift bandage. "Daniel," he replied weakly. "Well, Daniel," Emily said, "this is going to hurt." Before he could ask what she meant, Emily carefully lifted him upright. Daniel groaned in pain, gripping her arm tightly. "Easy, easy." Slowly, with enormous effort, Emily helped him hop toward the doorway. When Daniel saw the tall grey stallion waiting outside, his eyes widened slightly. "That your horse?" "Sort of," Emily said nervously. "I just bought him." Daniel studied the animal carefully. "Mustang," he murmured. Emily nodded. "Untrained." Daniel gave a tired half-laugh. "You've got guts riding that thing in these mountains." Emily glanced at the stallion again. "Or I'm just lucky." Getting Daniel onto the horse was the hardest part. The stallion shifted uneasily when the injured man leaned against him. But surprisingly, he didn't panic. He didn't rear. He didn't fight. Emily spoke softly while guiding Daniel onto the saddle behind her. "Easy, boy, it's okay." The horse stood still, as if he somehow understood. Finally, after several tense moments, Daniel managed to climb onto the saddle behind Emily, wrapping one arm weakly around her waist for balance. "All right," Emily said. She took a deep breath. "Let's go home." The ride down the mountain was slow. Painfully slow. Rain continued pouring across the trail, turning dirt into slippery mud. Every step had to be careful. Every turn felt dangerous. Emily held the reins lightly, letting the stallion choose his footing. She realized something important very quickly. The horse knew this terrain far better than she did. He moved confidently across the rocky ground, avoiding loose stones and unstable slopes without needing guidance. At one point, they reached the section of trail where the rockslide had occurred earlier. Emily's stomach tightened. The path was partially blocked by fallen stones. But the stallion didn't hesitate. Instead, he carefully navigated a narrow route along the outer edge of the trail, stepping over rocks and squeezing through gaps with incredible precision. Daniel shifted behind her, impressed. "This horse saved my life today," he murmured quietly. Emily smiled faintly. You're not the only one. Lightning flashed across the sky again, illuminating the canyon in a blinding white glow. The storm was starting to move east. But darkness was coming quickly. They still had miles to travel. And the mountain trails at night could be unforgiving. Emily leaned forward slightly, patting the stallion's neck. You're doing amazing, she whispered. The horse flicked his ears and picked up the pace. An hour later, the rain began to lighten. Through the trees ahead, Emily finally saw something that made her chest swell with relief. A wooden fence line. Her ranch. Daniel, she said, excitement in her voice. We're almost there. The injured man nodded weakly behind her. Lights from the ranch house glowed warmly in the distance. Emily guided the stallion through the gate and toward the barn. The moment they arrived, she jumped down quickly and rushed to help Daniel off the saddle. It took a few minutes, but she managed to guide him inside where he could rest on a pile of hay. I'll call an ambulance, she said, grabbing her phone. Daniel stopped her for a moment. Before you do, he said slowly. Emily looked at him. The man nodded toward the stallion standing quietly near the barn door. You realize that horse didn't just save my life today. Emily followed his gaze. The grey Mustang stood calmly, rainwater still dripping from his mane. He saved yours too. Emily looked at the horse for a long moment. Her chest filled with emotion she hadn't expected. Just 2 days ago, she had regretted buying him. Now, she couldn't imagine not having him. She walked over slowly and placed both hands on his neck. You're not the wrong horse, she whispered. Not even close. But Emily still didn't know something remarkable. The story of this horse, and the way he had found Daniel in that storm, was about to reveal a truth that would shock everyone who heard it. The storm finally passed sometime after midnight. By then, the ranch house was warm again, the fire in the stone fireplace crackling softly as rainwater dripped from the roof outside. The chaos of the evening had settled into a quiet tension, the kind that follows a day where everything could have gone terribly wrong. Daniel had been taken to the small clinic in the nearby town. The ambulance arrived nearly an hour after Emily called, its headlights cutting through the darkness of the ranch road like a beacon. Before they left, the paramedics confirmed what Emily already suspected. Daniel's leg was broken badly, but he was going to survive. And that was all that mattered. Emily stood alone in the barn now, leaning against the wooden stall door, watching the grey Mustang quietly chewing hay. The lantern light flickered across his strong shoulders. He looked calmer than she had ever seen him. Almost peaceful. Emily crossed her arms, still trying to process everything that had happened in just one day. You know, she said softly, when I bought you, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The horse lifted his head slightly, ears flicking toward her voice. Emily smiled faintly. But today, you saved 2 people. The stallion blinked slowly. For a moment, Emily wondered if horses understood more than people realized. Because somehow, it felt like he did. The next morning, the sun rose over the ranch like nothing had happened. Golden light spread across the hills, drying the last drops of rain on the grass. Birds returned to the fences, chirping like the storm had been nothing more than a passing shadow. Emily poured herself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. But she didn't have long to enjoy the quiet morning. A dusty pickup truck rolled slowly down the ranch road around mid-morning. Emily frowned as she watched it approach. When the truck stopped near the barn, a tall older man stepped out. His grey beard and worn leather hat made him instantly recognizable. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Walker. It was the same old rancher from the auction. The one who had warned her not to buy the Mustang. Walker tipped his hat politely as he approached. Morning, Emily. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised. Walker leaned against the fence. Got a call this morning. From who? Daniel. Emily blinked. He called you? Walker nodded. We go way back. Emily's mind raced. Daniel had barely been conscious when the ambulance left. How is he? She asked quickly. Walker smiled. Legs busted. Pride too. Emily exhaled in relief. I'm glad he's okay. Walker glanced toward the barn. That horse of yours, he's the reason. Emily nodded quietly. I know. Walker studied her face for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. You know where that Mustang came from? Emily shrugged. The auction said he was captured in the Badlands. Walker shook his head slowly. That's only half the story. Emily's curiosity immediately sharpened. What do you mean? Walker motioned toward the barn. Mind if I see him? Inside the barn, the stallion lifted his head again as they entered. Walker stepped closer to the stall, studying the horse carefully. The old rancher's expression slowly shifted from curiosity to recognition. Well, I'll be, he muttered quietly. Emily noticed. You've seen him before. Walker nodded slowly. 3 years ago. Emily blinked. 3 years. Walker leaned on the stall rail. There was a wildfire out near the western range, he explained. Big one. Burned thousands of acres. Emily listened carefully. During the fire, a herd of wild mustangs got trapped between the flames and a canyon wall. Emily's stomach tightened. That's awful. Walker nodded. Most of the herd scattered before the fire reached them. But one horse kept circling back. Emily looked at the stallion again. Walker continued. Firefighters said that stallion ran straight through smoke and flames trying to push the younger horses toward the open ridge. Emily's eyes widened. He was protecting them. Walker nodded slowly. Saved nearly the entire herd. Emily stared at the horse in disbelief. That's incredible. Walker shrugged. Horses aren't stupid. Emily's mind flashed back to the mountain trail. The rock slide. The cabin. The way the stallion had refused to move when danger was ahead. Walker pointed gently toward the horse's shoulder. See that scar? Emily stepped closer. Under the grey coat, a faint burn mark curved across the stallion's shoulder. I never noticed that before. Walker nodded. That's from the wildfire. Emily felt a wave of emotion she couldn't explain. So, this whole time. Walker finished the thought. You didn't buy the wrong horse. Emily looked at the stallion again. The same animal everyone at the auction called dangerous. Untrainable. Trouble. But the truth was something completely different. He wasn't dangerous. He was brave. And maybe. He had always been. Later that afternoon, Emily drove to the clinic to visit Daniel. He sat up in the hospital bed when she entered, his leg wrapped in a thick cast. Well, if it isn't my mountain rescuer, he said with a grin. Emily laughed. You're the one who survived a whole night in the storm. Daniel shook his head. Nope. He pointed toward the window. That horse did the rescuing. Emily pulled a chair beside the bed. There's something you should know, she said. She told him everything Walker had explained about the wildfire. Daniel listened carefully. When she finished, he smiled knowingly. I'm not surprised. Emily tilted her head. Why not? Daniel leaned back against the pillow. Because when a horse like that decides to trust you, it's never an accident. Emily felt something warm settle in her chest. A sense of belonging she hadn't felt since moving to the ranch. Daniel added one more thought. You didn't rescue that horse when you bought him. Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? Daniel smiled. I think he rescued you. Emily sat quietly for a moment. And deep down, she knew he might be right. A week later, the ranch felt different. Not quieter. Not busier. Just alive. Emily stood by the wooden fence one cool morning, watching the grey Mustang move across the pasture. Sunlight glimmered across his coat as he trotted freely through the tall grass, powerful muscles rolling beneath his skin. The same horse people had called dangerous. Untrainable. A mistake. Emily smiled softly as she leaned against the fence rail. Funny how wrong people can be, she murmured. The stallion slowed near the fence and looked toward her, ears forward, eyes calm. It still amazed her how much he had changed in such a short time. Or maybe, he hadn't changed at all. Maybe she had simply learned how to understand him. That morning, for the first time since bringing him home, Emily opened the gate and stepped into the pasture without a rope or saddle. The Mustang watched her carefully. The wind moved gently across the field. Emily walked slowly toward him, keeping her movements calm and relaxed. "Hey there," she whispered. The horse didn't run. He didn't back away. Instead, he stood still, observing her. 3 days ago, he wouldn't have allowed anyone to come within 10 feet of him. Now Emily stopped just a few steps away. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then something incredible happened. The stallion lowered his head slightly. Emily's breath caught in her chest. It was a small gesture, but anyone who knew horses understood what it meant. Trust. Real trust. Slowly, she reached out and rested her hand on his neck. The Mustang didn't move. Instead, he exhaled softly, warm breath drifting into the cool morning air. Emily laughed quietly, her eyes filling with emotion. "Well," she whispered, "I guess we're partners now." Word about the mountain rescue had spread quickly through the town. Small towns had a way of turning remarkable events into stories that traveled faster than the wind. Within days, people were stopping by the ranch just to see the horse. Emily wasn't used to visitors. But she didn't mind. One afternoon, the old rancher Walker arrived again with 2 young kids from town who had begged him to show them the famous Mustang. The children stood near the fence, eyes wide with excitement. "Is that really the horse that saved the man in the mountains?" the younger boy asked. Emily smiled. "That's the one." Walker leaned on the fence beside her. "You know," he said quietly, "people are talking about entering him in the regional Mustang showcase next spring." Emily raised an eyebrow. "A competition?" Walker nodded. "Horses like him, they don't come around often." Emily looked toward the stallion grazing peacefully across the field. 6 weeks ago, she would have laughed at the idea. Now, she wasn't so sure. The boy beside her tugged her sleeve. "What's his name?" he asked. Emily paused. That was something she hadn't decided yet. The stallion lifted his head at that exact moment, the sunlight catching the silver streaks in his mane. Emily thought about the wildfire Walker had described. The mountain storm. The rock slide. The way he had found the cabin where Daniel lay injured. And the way he had slowly chosen to trust her. A name formed in her mind. "Phoenix," she said. Walker smiled. "Rising from the fire." Emily nodded. "Exactly." A few months later, spring arrived. The ranch was greener than Emily had ever seen it. Wildflowers bloomed along the hills, and the pastures stretched endlessly under the bright blue sky. But the biggest change wasn't the land. It was Emily herself. For the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. The ranch no longer felt like a quiet place to hide from the past. It had become a place full of purpose. And Phoenix was at the center of it all. Training him had taken patience. Some days were frustrating. Other days were incredible. But slowly, the wild Mustang had transformed into something extraordinary. Not a tame horse. Not a broken horse. But a partner. The kind riders dream about once in a lifetime. One afternoon, Daniel returned to the ranch with crutches and a wide grin. His leg was still healing, but he insisted on seeing the horse that saved him. Emily led Phoenix into the yard. The stallion walked calmly beside her now, no rope needed. Daniel chuckled when he saw him. "Still looks like a troublemaker." Emily laughed. "Oh, he definitely is." Daniel reached out carefully and rubbed the horse's neck. "Good to see you again, friend." Phoenix snorted softly. Walker, who had come along for the visit, leaned back against the fence. "You know," the old rancher said thoughtfully, "I've been around horses for 40 years. Emily glanced at him. "And?" Walker pointed at Phoenix. "That one's special." Emily nodded quietly. "I know." Walker smiled. "But the real miracle isn't the horse." Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Walker gestured toward the 2 of them standing side by side. "It's the bond." Emily looked at Phoenix. The Mustang turned his head slightly, brushing his nose against her shoulder. And in that moment, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Later that evening, Emily rode Phoenix across the open pasture as the sun began to set. The sky burned with shades of orange and gold. The wind carried the scent of grass and distant pine trees. Phoenix moved beneath her with smooth, confident strides, powerful yet gentle. Emily leaned forward slightly, her hand resting on his neck. "You know," she whispered, "I almost didn't buy you." The horse flicked his ears. Emily smiled. "And that would have been the biggest mistake of my life." Phoenix continued running across the open field as the sun dipped below the horizon. For Emily, the wild horse she once regretted buying had become something far greater than she ever expected. A partner. A protector. And the reason her life had finally begun again. And if this incredible story reminded you how powerful the bond between humans and horses can be, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who loves horses as much as you do.